When I inherited $4.5 million, I wanted to see my son's true colors. I called Brandon and told him I'd lost everything and needed to stay with him. He said, "Sure, Dad, come over tomorrow morning." But the next morning, when I arrived at his doorstep with my luggage, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My own son had betrayed me in the worst possible way. What happened 2 days later taught him a lesson he would never forget. Before I begin, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. This lesson I learned at 72 might save families everywhere, including yours. But let me back up and tell you how this all started. My name is Wade Harper, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about disappointment. I'd been living alone in my small apartment on New York's Upper West Side for 10 years now, ever since my wife Margaret passed. The place isn't much. Peeling wallpaper, a radiator that clanks like a ghost, and windows that rattle when the subway passes. But it was home that Tuesday morning. I was nursing my second cup of coffee when the phone rang. Unknown number, which usually meant telemarketers. "Mr. Harper, this is Robert Thompson from Thompson & Associates. I'm an attorney here in downtown New York." My first thought was trouble. Had I forgotten to pay some bill? "I'm calling about the estate of George Kowalski. I believe he was your neighbor, George, the old Polish man next door for the past decade. We'd bonded over Yankees baseball and our mutual hatred of the building's broken elevator. When he got sick last year, I started checking on him daily, bringing groceries when his arthritis flared up, sitting with him during those long, lonely afternoons. He passed 3 weeks ago. I found him peaceful in his recliner with a Yankees game still playing. I attended his small funeral, one of only 5 people there. George left specific instructions in his will. Mr. Thompson continued. He named you as his sole beneficiary." I nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry." "What? Mr. Harper, George left you his entire estate. He was quite successful in real estate investments. Though he lived modestly, the total value comes to approximately $4.5 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. $4.5 million. I'd never owned more than a few thousand at any given time. "That's impossible," I stammered. "George lived in the same building as me. He clipped coupons. He bought day-old bread. He was very private about his wealth. His note specifically mentions your kindness during his final years. He wrote, 'Wade Harper showed me what family really means. He deserves to know that kindness doesn't go unnoticed.'" I had to sit down. George, my quiet neighbor, who I'd helped with groceries and doctor's appointments, had left me a fortune. Me, a retired factory worker who'd lived paycheck to paycheck my entire life. Mr. Thompson explained the paperwork and legal processes, but I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, trying to process this impossible reality. After I hung up, I sat staring at the cracked linoleum floor. $4.5 million. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. And that's when my thoughts turned to Brandon. With this money, I began thinking about my son. The old photo on my mantel caught my eye as I sat there, still processing the lawyer's words. It was taken 15 years ago at Brandon's college graduation. There we were, father and son, arms around each other's shoulders, both grinning like we'd conquered the world. Brandon had just landed his first job at an accounting firm. I was so proud I could barely contain myself. But looking at that picture now, I wondered when everything started to change. I remembered when Brandon was 9 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, standing in our backyard after I'd fixed his broken bicycle chain. His gap-toothed smile was brighter than the summer sun as he looked up at me and said, "Dad, You're my hero. Those 4 words sustained me through every double shift at the factory, every aching muscle, every sacrifice I made to give him a better life than I'd had. Margaret used to say Brandon had my stubborn streak and her gentle heart. After she died, it was just the 2 of us for a while. Brandon was 37, then already married to Kayla for 3 years. At first, he called every few days, checking on me, inviting me over for Sunday dinners. We'd watch football together, and for those precious hours, it felt like I still had family. Then, Kayla started making subtle changes. The Sunday dinners became monthly. Then, every few months, the phone calls grew shorter, more businesslike. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Everything good, great. Talk soon. Click. Kayla was polite enough when I visited, but there was an ice-cold distance in her green eyes that made me feel like an intruder in their pristine suburban home. She'd smile with her mouth, but never her eyes, asking pointed questions about my health, my finances, my plans for getting more active with people my own age. The first birthday that hurt was my 70th. Brandon called to wish me well, but couldn't come over because Kayla had planned a weekend getaway to some spa in Connecticut. Rain check, Dad. We'll celebrate when we get back. We never did. Christmas that year was worse. I'd bought thoughtful gifts, wrapped them carefully, and driven to their house in Westfield with a homemade apple pie, Margaret's recipe. Kayla answered the door in an expensive red dress, clearly ready to leave for some party. "Oh, Wade," she said, not bothering to hide her annoyance. "We're actually heading to my parents' place in Pennsylvania. Didn't Brandon mention that?" He hadn't. Brandon appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. "Sorry, Dad. Last-minute change of plans. You understand?" I stood there on their doorstep, holding my pie like some pathetic door-to-door salesman, watching my son choose his wife's family over his father. Thanksgiving brought the same pattern. Easter, too. Every holiday became an exercise in creative excuses, work commitments, travel plans, Kayla's family obligations. Always something more important than spending time with the man who'd raised Brandon single-handedly after his mother died. The worst part wasn't the rejections themselves. It was watching my son transform from the boy who called me his hero into a man who seemed embarrassed by my existence. When he did visit, which became increasingly rare, I could see him calculating how quickly he could leave, checking his phone, making excuses about early mornings or Kayla waiting at home. I started to feel like a burden, a chore to be managed rather than a father to be loved. Sitting there with George's life-changing gift in my lap, I realized something had crystallized in my mind. All those years of wondering, of making excuses for Brandon's behavior, of telling myself that this was just how adult children lived their lives. It all came down to one simple question. I needed to know if Brandon truly loved his father or if I was just an obligation he tolerated out of duty. The plan came to me that very evening as I sat staring at George's inheritance paperwork spread across my kitchen table. I would test Brandon, not with some elaborate scheme, but with the most basic human need, a father asking his son for help in a time of crisis. If Brandon truly cared about me, he'd step up without hesitation. If I was just an obligation, then I'd finally have my answer. This story had to be believable. I couldn't just say I was broke. Brandon knew I had my pension. It needed to be a sudden catastrophe that would strip away everything overnight. I crafted the perfect scenario, bad investments I'd hidden out of pride, mounting medical bills from secret tests, credit card debt spiraling out of control. The final blow would be my apartment building being foreclosed, forcing all tenants to vacate within 24 hours. It was believable because it happened to people every day in America. One medical emergency, one bad decision, and a lifetime of savings could disappear in months. I practiced the conversation in front of my bathroom mirror like some amateur actor. Brandon, I need to tell you something. And it's not easy for me to say. I've made terrible financial mistakes, and now I'm paying the price. The building's being foreclosed on, and I have nowhere to go. The hardest part was the emotional manipulation I'd have to employ. I'd mention his mother, how disappointed she'd be. I'd talk about my wounded pride. I'd make him feel like the successful son who could save his foolish old father. It made me sick, but I had to know. I pulled out my old suitcases from the bedroom closet, 2 battered pieces of luggage that Margaret and I had used for our Niagara Falls honeymoon 45 years ago. I packed them with enough clothes for a week, toiletries, and personal items to make the story convincing. As I folded my worn shirts, I kept thinking about that 9-year-old boy who'd called me his hero. Was I betraying that child's memory by testing the man he'd become, or was I honoring it by refusing to accept that the love between us had died? I placed Margaret's photograph carefully between my shirts, wrapped in tissue paper. If Brandon saw it when I unpacked, it would add authenticity, a desperate man clinging to his most precious possessions. The psychological warfare I was waging against my own son felt wrong on every level. But the alternative, continuing to live in doubt, continuing to feel like an unwanted burden, felt worse. Tuesday night, I sat in my living room with the phone in my lap, staring at Brandon's number. My thumb hovered over the call button for nearly an hour. This was it. Once I made this call, there would be no going back. I'd either discover that my son still loved me or learn that the boy who'd called me his hero was truly gone forever. I took a deep breath and made my decision. Tomorrow I would call Brandon. Wednesday evening arrived faster than I wanted. I sat in my worn armchair, phone trembling in my hands. 7:30 p.m. A reasonable time to call. My heart hammered as I pressed the call button. "Hey, Dad." Brandon's voice came through clear and warm. In the background, I could hear a television. "Brandon, son, I need to talk to you about something serious." "What's wrong? You sound upset." The concern in his voice gave me hope. Maybe I was wrong about everything. I've made some terrible mistakes. Brandon, financial mistakes I've been too proud to tell you about. I let genuine shame seep into my words. I've been struggling for months, but it's gotten out of control. Dad, what kind of mistakes? I made some investments last year. Thought I was being smart with my retirement money, but they went bad. Really bad. Then I had medical tests that insurance didn't cover. Put them on credit cards thinking I could pay them off quickly. Medical tests, Dad. Why didn't you tell me you were having health problems? The worry in his voice made my stomach twist with guilt. I didn't want you to worry. But Brandon, it's gotten worse. The credit card payments, medical bills, they've been piling up. I've been borrowing just to make minimum payments, and now they're foreclosing on the building. All tenants have to be out by tomorrow evening. I have nowhere to go, son. Silence stretched between us. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Jesus, Dad, why didn't you come to me sooner? I was too ashamed, too proud. Your mother always said my pride would be my downfall. Okay, let me think. I heard him moving around. How much do you owe? Maybe Kayla and I can help with the debt, or look into refinancing. Brandon, I don't need money, I interrupted. I just need a place to stay for a few days while I figure out my next move. Maybe look into senior housing or find a small apartment I can afford. Of course, Dad. Of course you can stay with us. But something in his tone shifted. The response came too quickly, too smoothly, like he'd been expecting this exact request. Are you sure I don't want to impose on you and Kayla? Don't be ridiculous. You're my father. Come over tomorrow morning and we'll figure everything out. Kayla will understand completely. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. Kayla, who had spent 6 years making it clear I wasn't welcome, would understand completely. Kayla, who couldn't stand 2-hour dinners with me, would be fine with me moving in indefinitely. That's wonderful, son. I can't tell you how much this means to me. Don't worry about anything. Dad, just pack what you need and come over around 9 tomorrow morning. We'll have the guest room ready. Thank you, Brandon. I love you. Love you too. Dad, get some rest. Everything's going to work out. After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone. Brandon had said all the right words, expressed all the right concerns, made all the right promises. So why did I feel like I'd just been reading from a script? There was something off in Brandon's voice, something that didn't ring true. Thursday morning came with the kind of crisp October air that usually lifted my spirits. Not today. I sat in the back of the taxi, clutching the handles of my 2 old suitcases, watching New York skyline fade behind us as we headed toward the suburbs. The driver, a chatty guy named Miguel, kept trying to make conversation about the weather, the Yankees' disappointing season, anything to fill the silence. I nodded politely, but couldn't focus on his words. My mind was still replaying last night's phone call, that strange note in Brandon's voice that I couldn't shake. Westfield's nice this time of year, Miguel said as we exited the highway. You visiting family? Something like that, I replied, staring out the window at the neat rows of suburban homes, each with their perfectly manicured lawns and 2-car garages. This was the American dream Brandon had built for himself, far from the cramped New York apartment where I had raised him. 20 minutes later, Miguel turned onto Maple Street. I knew the address by heart, 847 Maple Street. I'd sent Christmas cards there for 6 years, though I'd only visited a handful of times. Should be right up here, Miguel said, slowing down. What's the number again? 847, I said, then looked up to point out Brandon's house. My blood turned to ice. There, planted squarely in the front yard like a tombstone, was a bright red for sale sign. Bold white letters proclaimed Coldwell Banker with a phone number beneath it. That can't be right, I whispered, leaning forward in my seat. Driver, are you sure this is Maple Street? Yeah, this is it. 847 right there. Miguel pointed to the house number clearly visible on the mailbox. I stared at Brandon's house, or what used to be Brandon's house, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe they were upgrading, moving to a bigger place. Maybe the sign was old, left over from when they'd bought it. Maybe I was having some kind of senior moment and had gotten confused about the address. Wait here, I told Miguel, my voice barely steady. I'll just be a minute. I climbed out of the taxi on shaking legs, leaving my suitcases behind. The for sale sign looked brand new, the metal stakes driven deep into the earth. There was even a small plastic box attached to it, presumably holding information sheets for potential buyers. I walked up the familiar brick pathway to the front door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The decorative autumn wreath that Kayla always hung was gone. The porch light that used to stay on was dark. I pressed the doorbell and waited. Nothing. I pressed it again, holding it longer this time. Still nothing. I knocked on the door. 3 sharp raps that echoed through what sounded like an empty house. "Brandon, Kayla, it's Dad. I'm here like we planned." Silence. I moved to the front window and cupped my hands around my eyes, peering through the glass into what used to be their living room. My legs nearly gave out. The room was completely empty. No furniture, no pictures on the walls, no coffee table where Kayla used to arrange her expensive magazines. Nothing but bare walls and clean carpet, as if no one had ever lived there at all. I stumbled back to the taxi, my mind reeling. Miguel took one look at my face and got out to help me. "You okay, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost." "They're gone," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. "They're gone." "Who's gone?" I couldn't answer him. I couldn't form the words to explain that my son, the boy I'd raised from birth, the man I'd called less than 12 hours ago, had looked me in the eye through the phone and lied. He told me to come over, told me Kayla would understand, told me they'd have the guest room ready, all while knowing he was abandoning his home in the middle of the night. Miguel helped me back into the taxi, loading my suitcases while I sat there in stunned silence. As we pulled away from 847 Maple Street, I caught one last glimpse of that red sign in the rearview mirror. My son had chosen to run away rather than help his father. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I looked up to see a middle-aged Latina woman approaching from the house next door. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and wore a cardigan despite the mild weather. "I'm Maria Gonzalez. I live right there. Are you looking for Brandon and Kayla?" Miguel rolled down his window. "You know what happened to the people who lived here?" Maria's face grew somber. "Oh my. You must be Brandon's father. You didn't know they moved out." "Moved out?" I climbed out of the taxi. "I just talked to Brandon last night. He told me to come over this morning. They left last night around 10. I was watching the late news when I heard this terrible commotion. A moving truck backing into their driveway. Men shouting instructions. A moving truck at 10 p.m. Who moves in the middle of the night unless something's terribly wrong? Brandon and Kayla were rushing around like their house was on fire, throwing boxes into this big truck. Did you talk to them?" I tried. I went outside to ask if everything was all right. Kayla barely looked at me. She was barking orders at the movers, telling them to hurry, that they had to be done by midnight. Maria paused. She told the moving men it was a family emergency, that they had to leave immediately for out of state. "But Mr. Harper, I've lived next to them for 4 years, and I've never seen Kayla move that fast for any emergency." "What about Brandon?" "That's the strangest part. Brandon looked guilty, ashamed, kept his head down, wouldn't make eye contact. When I asked if everything was okay, he just mumbled something about taking care of family business." Family business. While I was worried about imposing on them, my son was running away from me. "There's something else," Maria said, lowering her voice. Around 10:30, I heard Kayla on her phone. She was standing by their garage, and sound carries in this neighborhood. What did she say? She said, "We can't let him stay here. David, we have to leave before he arrives in the morning." Then something about how she'd worked too hard to build this life to let it get complicated by family obligations. Family obligations. That's what I was to Kayla. "There's more." She also said Brandon doesn't have the backbone to say no to his father. So I'm making the decision for both of us. I felt something inside me break and reform into something harder. Kayla hadn't just convinced Brandon to abandon me. She'd orchestrated the entire thing. She decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience, and my weak-willed son had gone along with it. Mr. Harper, this isn't the first time I've seen Kayla treat you poorly. Every time you visited, I've watched from my kitchen window. She never seemed happy to see you. Always checking her watch, finding reasons to cut visits short. I knew she didn't like me, but I never thought. She's controlled Brandon from the day they moved in. I've watched that man become a shadow of himself. The few times I talked to him alone, he seemed different, warmer, more genuine. But the moment Kayla appeared, it was like watching someone put on a mask. Maria placed a gentle hand on my arm. I'm so sorry this happened to you. No parent should be treated this way. Standing there on Maple Street, I finally understood the truth. Kayla hadn't just influenced my son. She had systematically turned him against me, convinced him that I was a burden rather than a father to be loved. Kayla had transformed my son into someone who could betray his own father. As Miguel pulled away from Maple Street, I sat with my phone in trembling hands. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by pure, righteous anger. I scrolled through my contacts and found Robert Thompson's number. Mr. Harper, how can I help you today? Robert, I need your help with something urgent, something that's going to sound crazy. I told him everything. The test, the phone call with Brandon, the empty house, Maria's revelations about Kayla's manipulation. With each detail, I could hear Robert's breathing grow heavier. Jesus Christ. Wade, he said when I finished. I've handled family disputes, but this is beyond cruel. I want to buy his house. Robert. Silence. Then, I'm sorry. What? Brandon's house. It's for sale. I want to buy it, and I want to be there when he shows up to sign the closing papers. Wade, I understand you're angry, but I have $4.5 million. Robert, George's money. Money that Brandon doesn't know exists. I could hear Robert pacing. You want to confront him at the closing. I want him to look me in the eye and explain how he could do this to his father. I want Kayla to see that the family obligation she was so eager to avoid just became her new landlord. Robert was quiet for a long moment. It's brilliant in a twisted way. But Wade, once you do this, there's no going back. My relationship with Brandon died last night when he chose to run away rather than help me. What I'm doing now is just making it official. Give me the address. I'll call the listing agent immediately. I rattled off the Maple Street address with the Coldwell Banker information. I'll call you back within the hour. 45 minutes later. My phone rang. The asking price is $550,000, Robert reported. It's been on the market for exactly 12 hours. Several inquiries, but no official offers yet. Offer them $565,000 cash. No inspections, no contingencies. I want this deal closed as fast as legally possible. 565. That's 15,000 over asking. I don't care about the money. Robert, I care about being in that room when Brandon realizes what he's lost. They can probably close by Friday afternoon if we move fast. Day after tomorrow. Perfect. And Robert, I want you to make sure I'm the one who hands Brandon the keys at closing. I want to see his face when he realizes who bought his house. You want to be at the closing table. I want to be the surprise guest at my son's going-away party. After I hung up, I leaned back in the taxi seat and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of taking control. For too long, I'd been the passive father, accepting whatever scraps of attention Brandon and Kayla threw my way. I'd made excuses for their behavior, convinced myself this was just how modern families worked. But George's gift had given me something more valuable than money. It had given me power. The power to show my son exactly what kind of man his father really was. The power to demonstrate that kindness and loyalty weren't weaknesses to be exploited, but strengths that commanded respect. Brandon thought he was escaping his obligations by running away in the night. He had no idea that his father was about to become the most important person in his immediate future. In 2 days, Brandon would discover who his new landlord really was. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth that reminded me of the day Margaret died. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee, watching the sun paint New York skyline gold. Today was the day I would face my son. Robert had confirmed everything the night before. The closing was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Westfield Title Company. Brandon and Kayla would be there to sign away their house, expecting to meet some anonymous cash buyer. They had no idea the buyer was the father Brandon had abandoned 3 days ago. I spent the morning thinking about the 40 years I'd raised Brandon alone after Margaret's heart attack. He was only 6 when she died, barely old enough to understand that Mommy wasn't coming home. I remember holding him that first night, both of us crying, promising everything would be okay, even though I had no idea how. But I kept that promise. I worked double shifts at the Ford plant, came home exhausted and covered in grease, only to help Brandon with homework at the kitchen table. When he needed new shoes, I ate peanut butter sandwiches for 2 weeks to save money. When he wanted Little League, I picked up weekend construction work for the equipment and fees. I never complained because that's what fathers do. They sacrifice without keeping score, without expecting anything except maybe a birthday phone call and the knowledge they raised a good man. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed at that last part. I pulled my best suit from the closet, navy blue wool that I'd bought for Margaret's funeral. It still fit, though loose around the shoulders. I paired it with the silver tie Margaret gave me for our 20th anniversary. The one she said made me look distinguished. Standing in the bathroom mirror, I practiced what I'd say to Brandon. I'd rehearsed dozens of times, but the words still felt foreign. The truth was, no words would be adequate. How do you tell your child they've broken your heart? How do you explain their betrayal has changed you into someone you barely recognize? I thought about George, my quiet neighbor, who lived modestly while sitting on a fortune. He'd left me his money because I'd shown him kindness without expecting anything in return. The irony wasn't lost. A stranger had valued my compassion more than my own son did. But George's gift had given me more than financial security. It had given me the power to demand answers, to force Brandon to confront what he'd done. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking permission to exist in my son's life. I slipped George's inheritance letter into my jacket pocket, along with the house keys Robert would hand me at closing. Physical proof of who I really was. Not the desperate, broken man Brandon thought he'd escaped, but someone with means to change the course of all our lives. The drive to Westfield felt both eternal and instantaneous. I'd hired a car service. I wanted to arrive with dignity, not fumbling out of a taxi. As we pulled into Midwest Title Services parking lot, I saw Brandon's silver Honda Civic already there. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. This wasn't the trembling old man who'd sat devastated in a taxi 3 days ago. This was someone who'd found his backbone, someone who'd remembered that respect isn't given. It's earned, and sometimes it's taken. I straightened my tie one final time and stepped out of the car. The moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The title company's lobby smelled like fresh coffee and leather. I walked up to the receptionist. "I'm here for the Harper closing." "Of course, mister." She paused, waiting. "Harper. Wade Harper." Her eyebrows raised. She'd clearly been expecting someone else. "Conference room B, just down the hall. They're already getting started." Through the glass door, I could see them. Brandon sat at a long wooden table, wearing the same blue shirt from our last Christmas dinner. Kayla sat beside him in a cream blazer, her blonde hair pulled back perfectly. They were leaning over papers with their realtor. Robert was already there, seated across from them. When he saw me, he gave an almost imperceptible nod. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Sorry I'm late," I said, stepping inside. Brandon's head snapped up, the color draining from his face. "Dad," his voice barely a whisper. Kayla's mouth fell open. "Hello, son," I said, taking the empty chair across from him. "I believe you know why I'm here." The realtor looked confused. "I'm sorry. There seems to be some mistake. We're waiting for the buyer." "That would be me," I said calmly, pulling George's inheritance letter from my jacket. "Wade Harper. I'm the cash buyer." Brandon stared like I was a ghost. "I don't understand." "Dad, what are you doing here? How did you—" $4.5 million. I cut him off. "That's what my neighbor George left me when he died. George Kowalski, the old man I helped with groceries for 10 years. He left me everything because he said I showed him what family really means." Kayla found her voice. "This is impossible. You said you were broke." "I lied." I looked directly at Brandon. "I wanted to test something. I wanted to know if my son would help his father in need, or if I was just an obligation to be avoided." Brandon's hands shook. "Dad, I can explain." Can you explain why you agreed to let me stay, then fled in the middle of the night? Why you chose to abandon your father rather than inconvenience your wife?" "It wasn't like that," Brandon stammered. Kayla thought, I repeated. "Not you. Kayla," I turned to my daughter-in-law, who sat rigid. "Tell me, Kayla, what exactly did you think when you heard my son's father needed help?" She said nothing. Robert cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed, Mr. Harper has the funds ready." For 30 minutes, we sat in uncomfortable silence while papers were signed. Brandon kept trying to catch my eye, but I focused on the documents. When it was over, the realtor handed me the keys. "Congratulations, Mr. Harper. You're now the owner of 847 Maple Street." I stood and looked at my son. "Brandon, I want you to understand something. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this because you needed to learn that actions have consequences. You chose to treat your father like a burden instead of a blessing." Tears streamed down Brandon's face. "Dad, please, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake." "Yes, you did. But more importantly, you showed me who you really are. And that's something I needed to know." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "I hope someday you'll remember that 9-year-old boy who called me his hero. Because that boy understood something you've forgotten. Family isn't about convenience. It's about showing up, especially when it's hard. As I left that conference room, I thought about all the parents watching this story, wondering about their own children. We raise them with love, sacrifice everything for their happiness, and hope they'll remember those lessons when we need them most. But sometimes our children forget. Sometimes they choose comfort over character, convenience over compassion. And sometimes, as painful as it is, we have to let them face the consequences of those choices. To every parent out there who's ever felt forgotten, who's ever wondered if their sacrifices mattered, they did. Your love shaped them, even if they can't see it now. And to every adult child watching this, call your parents. Visit them. Don't wait until it's too late to show them they matter. Because sometimes we have to lose everything to realize what truly matters. 6 months have passed since that day at the title company. Brandon has called me 19 times. I've counted. I haven't answered yet, but I've listened to every voicemail. His voice breaks a little more each time, and I can hear genuine remorse replacing the panic. This grandpa story isn't about revenge. It's about redemption. God has been working on my heart, softening the anger that once consumed me. The Lord teaches us that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing love over bitterness. My true story became one of setting boundaries while keeping the door open for healing. George's gift taught me that wealth means nothing without people to share it with. But it also showed me that sometimes we must stand firm to earn respect. These grandpa stories remind us that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. I've decided to sell Brandon's house back to him at cost, not because he deserves it, but because God calls us to extend grace, even when it's unearned. This true story will have a different ending than I first imagined. The final grandpa's stories lesson love fiercely, but love wisely. Set boundaries that protect your dignity while leaving room for reconciliation. If this touched you, share it with someone who needs courage to stand up for themselves. Comment below about your own family struggles. You're not alone. Subscribe for more true stories about family, faith, and finding strength when life tests us. Sometimes the most powerful healing begins with the hardest conversations.